Hi, I'm Angela Fair. Today I'm going to show you a watercolor product I've been working with lately. It's unpredictable, full of vibrant color, and just a lot of fun. Let's give it a try. This is Brusho, made by Colorcraft, and I started out with the assortment pack of 8 different colors, and then since then I added my own bottle of blue because this assortment pack doesn't come with any blue, which I think is just kind of silly. The little containers inside, I've actually marked them with a marker on the top because there's no indication on the container aside from the words what color is in there. So this way I can glance at it and say I want to work with the yellow. I can reach in and pull out the one that I have that is yellow. If I'm looking for a brown, well, you can see I have 3 that have the same marking on the top, so then I have to compare using my little comparison sheet, which I've made here. All I did was I put a little blob of water and then dropped in some of the pigment crystals, and we're going to look at those in a second. And this gives me a basic idea of the colors in each container. You notice that just because it says a certain color doesn't mean it's actually going to look like that. To me, olive green doesn't really look like olive green. Terracotta is much brighter red than I would have expected. Moss green is browner. So having this sample is really helpful. Right now, my favorite of the colors, I think, is the sandstone. Yellow ochre is fun to use, and burnt sienna. And I'll show you a painting that I did using just the moss green and actually, I think it was the moss green, yellow ochre, and the burnt sienna. And that's this painting here. You can see amazing vivid colors in my wash. So we're going to play a little bit with Brusho today. Because I want to work with a lot of fluidity today, I'm going to change my usual method. Instead of taping my paper down, I'm going to actually spray my painting board with water and give it a nice saturation. It's going to have a nice little lake on here. And then I'm going to lay my paper right down onto that lake, and that lake will serve as a magnet. It'll suction my paper to the board so that my colors, my paper stays saturated longer because it's already soaking up water from the back side. I'm going to get it wet on the front side, and then I've got lots of time to play with color. I'm going to spritz it with a little bit of water. I don't want to saturate my whole page at this stage. And I'm going to plan a composition. What I'm thinking is I'm going to do maybe a diagonal with a little upswing, so a little swoop of one color, maybe my lighter color, and then mix in my darker color. So I'm going to start with the yellow ochre and just pry off the tube. Now, there's a couple different ways I work with this pigment. There's tons and tons of pigment in here. You really use very little to make a painting. One thing you can do is you can take a dry brush and just pick up a few of those crystals on the tip of your brush and shake them onto your paper. That's one way to do it. You can very gently, and this is the riskier way, tap some color down onto your paper with your finger. And here I got a chunk. And as you can see, it goes on. You can see there's multiple colors in this container. I've got a little orange, I've got a little green, and some yellow spreading on my wet paper. And where the paper is dry, like up in this corner, it's not spreading much at all. I'm going to put a little bit right there. And so I can decide right now, do I want it to spread more, in which case I need to moisten it some more. And the Brusho has beautiful movement as things are wet and fluid. I can now tilt my board and encourage that color to flow. And all those little separate color granules, the more water you have on your paper, the more time they have to dissolve, those colors will start to combine and give you that overall hue of yellow ochre. From here, I want to start adding my next color. And I'm going to add some more water, I think, to this area. And I like using a spray bottle because it's a little bit freer than wetting it with my brush, to the burnt sienna. And yet it covers a large area as well. And I'm going to tap that burnt sienna down. I'm going to put it right in here. I'm going to put a big chunk right there. And we'll see what that does. I'm going to put a big chunk right there. And let's try doing that where we have a mound of pigment and see what we can do with it by adding some water. First we'll work with the water that's already there, just tilting, and look at it flow. And that's giving me a very lovely and interesting effect. Now if I start to add water, back to my spray bottle here, now it's really starting to move. And you can see how rich and dark those strongest saturations of pigment are. It's beautiful. And it's harder to see the individual colors in the burnt sienna just because it's a much darker pigment. It's hard to tell what's actually there. Now I'm going to start using my brush. And I'm going to use a very light touch. So I might just very gently tap to get a little color to move in certain areas. And I want to drip a little color right on that mound there. These paints are described as acid-free. When I get a little bit of pigment on the tip of my brush, I can see the violet crystals that are mixed in with the burnt sienna. Now that's not all you can do. We have beautiful saturation of color. I also like that I have dark value and very light value. I'm keeping that swoop shape that I was talking about. I've found that the Brusho is quite staining, so while my watercolor paints will often, I can maybe take a damp brush and add a little water and push that color, but the Brusho has already started to soak in, so I can push the color, and you can see it getting a little bit lighter here where I add water to move the color on the surface of the paper, but a good deal of it has already soaked into the paper, so I don't have, I'm never going to get it right back to white again. Oh, that's way too much. I have a handful of salt, much more than I need, and with salt I can add texture. The salt will repel the pigment and water and give us beautiful sparkles. And this works best with quite a juicy, moist wash. I'm following that V shape that we originally planned. And this works best with a juicy, moist wash. Different colors will react in different ways. There we go, just a very little salt. There's lots left, which I will put in a little dish to save for next time I paint. Maybe a little bit over here too. And the salt's going to push that pigment around a little bit more as well. Now as the Brusho starts to dry, it's going to lose its sheen. It's going to stop being quite so shiny. I can choose right now if I want to add more moisture. There's a couple different things you can do as it starts to dry. I could spritz it with water. Sometimes that spatter of water, it's still too moist to make a difference now, but sometimes a spatter of spray from a water bottle will create interesting texture similar to what salt will do. And we're letting organic things happen as we're letting that fluid wash dry. So time is important, and also using observation to just pay attention to what's happening on your paper. So as that one is drying, I pulled out this other one that I prepared in advance. So the shapes are going to be slightly different, and that's what's so fun about this, is every time I do this I get a different result. You can see the texture from the salt here in these little sparkly bits that give this beautiful shape and this beautiful glow as well, and the little tendrils of color where they spread out with little fingers. And to me this looks like a big autumn leaf maybe, and everybody sees something different in these kind of washes. I'm going to keep it kind of abstract, that's my focus here, but I want to start pulling out some of the colors, the beautiful colors that I see. Because I've been using Brusho, I can make a choice here. Let's try painting with the Brusho. So I'm grabbing the burnt sienna, and I'm going to put a little bit of it in this little bowl here. And see if I can mix it up into a paint. And I actually haven't tried this before, so you're seeing something brand new. And so I'm not even sure how much water I'm going to need. I think definitely a little more than that. Okay, that gives me a little puddle of color to work with. And I might need to keep adding to it because I didn't put very much Brusho in that bowl. And let's use it now as a watercolor paint. So I'm seeing that leaf. Maybe I want to define a little bit of that shape with the Brusho. And the nice thing is I'm using the exact same color that is on the paper. There's no change. And if you're going, if you're trying to find a watercolor paint that matches, you might have to do a little bit of trial and error. And there's nothing wrong with that. I want to see how it runs and how it flows in my painting. And it has, of course, the same beautiful fluidity as watercolor. Over here I see a lovely leaf shape. And I'm going to add some new colors. I'm going to add some violet. This is dioxazine violet, and it's going to give me a lovely red violet when it mixes with this Brusho's version of burnt sienna. Very gorgeous. And all of a sudden I have a leaf here. And so I don't need to paint every detail in order for that leaf to work for me. I can stop right here. I can choose to continue that texturizing that I started by adding a little salt to this wash and letting it push some of that color around. Actually, I want to do a little bit right there. And then I can move on to another area of my painting. I'm going to, rather than mixing up another puddle of Brusho, which I'm not going to do simply because I don't have another spare bowl, I'm going to choose a color from my palette and see how it combines. This is quinacridone gold, and I think it'll make a good complement to what's already on the paper. It'll layer with what's already there, and that's the fun thing about watercolor, is because it layers, we can create this whole new color just by adding something new. And look at how that glows. Love it. I had just put some random brush strokes here, but they've actually done this really beautiful thing framing this speckly area, those sparkles. So I'm not even going to refine them with soften them with some water. Very pretty. Some straight quinacridone gold will give a little bit of dark contrast against the yellow ochre, I think, of the Brusho. And again, that's just more beauty there. I want everything to be tilted. I like the gravity doing its job here. So I've just I've just raised it up, put my bowl underneath, which is, I'll have to remember if I'm looking for that paint again. And I'm loving this leaf shape that's emerging on my paper. Painting something that's kind of intuitive and abstract like this can take a long time. I have a tendency to want to really take my time when it comes to painting in an abstract way, in an intuitive way. I cannot just knock it out in 2 short studio sessions. I want to look at it. I want to learn to see what the painting needs, and that involves giving it time. So you're not going to necessarily see the entire painting here, but a little bit of my process as I start to figure out what my painting needs to have. And I want to have a stem here. I want to give that feeling of one big leaf coming down. And with water right now, I'm just kind of interpreting the shape. I'm just painting with just a clean damp brush. That gives me an idea of what the shape of my leaf could look like if I took it in that direction, and doesn't change my painting at all. So that means I have a little bit of freedom to get it wrong or to change it. I do feel like as I re-wet the Brusho, it's a little bit more reactive to water than my watercolor paints would be. It gets this little glow as soon as I re-wet it. Watercolor's beautiful transparency means as we layer, we get gorgeous complexity of color. The colors that are underneath will show through, and it just makes our washes just that much more interesting. Let's touch some Quin Gold into this area here. Echo some of the glow we see elsewhere. So what's happening with the Brusho that I don't get with watercolor paint is that when it gets re-wet, I see a line happen. It lifts a little bit of that paint that's already on the paper and creates this whole new shape. So it's something that I would want to plan for. I painted those ideas of leaf veins over here, and you can actually see a line there where the wet brush mark met with the dry paper, even though I didn't have any paint on my brush at the time. And that just shows me that there is some lifting happening with the Brusho that I'm not accustomed to with my watercolor paint. It's not the end of the world. It doesn't make me want to throw all my Brusho away, but it does change the way I act when I'm painting, how the decisions I make as I paint. Going back to that raw sienna, or burnt sienna, sorry. Adding a little more Brusho in this area. Remember, with watercolor, as you add those darks, you are removing light from your paper. Those vibrant light areas will not be back, so you want to take your time, plan what you're going to do. We're going to add some interesting line right now to the painting. I'm going to grab my dagger brush, which has a very fine point, and just grabbing my Winsor Violet, my dioxazine violet. I'm going to create a few kind of seeking lines, connecting marks, because they're one of my favorite things to add into a painting, and it will get me back to that abstract feeling as well. I have to hold this brush quite loosely and let it have control. And so by giving the brush some more power, it keeps me from getting too tight in my painting, too controlled, too detailed. As soon as I start feeling myself wanting to paint a realistic leaf instead of that abstract that was my original goal, I need to trick myself into loosening up again. Sometimes you can do that by taking a break. Other times you might be able to do it right during the painting session, just by changing your brush, trying a different, adding a new medium. Sometimes I've even pulled out crayons or markers or texture mediums, just to, again, loosen me up so that I can paint more creatively. And right away I'm getting a little more freedom in my approach here, just focusing on making beautiful lines instead of getting that leaf shape just the way I want it, which would be trying to be too realistic, like a leaf. But it doesn't look like a leaf. But it's an abstract and it doesn't have to. Another thing I want to add is a little bit of spatter. I think I'm going to do that with my burnt sienna here, and I'm probably going to get it all over my fingers for the rest of the day. Toothbrush is very handy to use for spatter because it gives you that fine spray. A bolder spray can be achieved with a bigger brush. More water on that big brush, you'll get a bigger blotch. So try out different tools for different results. I actually think a yellow spatter could be really, really beautiful. Let's try it. Quinacridone Gold. And spattering that on a darker area, the Quin Gold will push against those damp, dark colors a little bit, but it'll be a much more subtle effect than if you were spattering with a darker color. I've grabbed some of my iridescent Aztec Gold watercolor paint by Daniel Smith. Wanted to add a little gold to my painting. It's watercolor, so it's going to be a little bit transparent and blend well with the watercolor. So it's not going to be a dramatic effect, and I'm just spattering it a little bit. around a couple areas of the painting. I try to look for balance. Here I'm working, here I've got a little bit of a diagonal of spatter, and there's a little bit on this side, so they kind of echo each other. As things dry, I could go in with a little bit of line art with my fine tip pen and create some line. Here where the line goes over a damp part of my painting, it's going to disappear a little bit, and that can give a beautiful kind of little lost and found shape. As long as you recognize that those painstaking lines you add might not be still there after everything's dried. They might just disappear a little more than you expect them to. So it's a very subtle effect, but that's okay because we have very subtle ability to see line, value, shape. Our eyes can really detect the most subtle variations, and I'm really liking those little gold lines here. And I think I could easily get lost in this meditative feeling of painting fine, organic shapes, line art on my painting. It's one of my favorite parts of adding detail, especially when I'm painting abstractly, because then I'm just motivated by what looks beautiful in my painting. Here where the gold goes over the wash, it's lifting that color underneath again, but it's a very subtle effect because the colors are so similar. The values are very similar as well. Okay, could easily, like I said, I could easily get lost in this painting. Painting abstract, intuitive watercolor, whether you're using Brusho or watercolor paint, it's very intuitive. So that means I need to give myself time to study the painting and see what it needs. And that means I can't promise that I'll demonstrate a complete painting when I'm talking about painting in abstract. You have to give the painting time to grow. In this case, we've demonstrated a little bit of how Brusho works, we've seen how it interacts with other watercolors, and we've talked about ways of developing our painting and strengthening our composition. Really studying it to see what it needs, trying to avoid being sucked into trying to paint the actual thing, and keep things loose and interesting. Remember that when you're painting abstractly, anything goes. Do what feels good. And as soon as you start to feel like, oh, this doesn't look like what it's supposed to look like, challenge yourself to change things up. Remind yourself that that is not the goal, that you are looking for ways to spark your creativity, to create a composition that pleases you, and just have a really good time. And so that means you get to do whatever you want. And to me, that's one of the most fun parts of painting abstractly, is following those little rabbit trails of ideas and never quite knowing where you're going to end up. If you like this video, why not subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any more watercolor techniques and demonstrations and live video lessons here on YouTube. Also, be sure to check out my website, learn.angelafair.com. There I have structured and targeted, focused watercolor online classes that are geared at really helping you strengthen your watercolor skills, paint expressively and loosely, and not get discouraged in the process when things don't always go as planned. I'm Angela Fair. Thanks for watching.